problems that we all can have, and I sure had them early on in my career, and it was my drawing errors, drawing of my shapes, drawing from life, and not really looking at the shapes, the various degrees of differences between one shape and another, or even the space between a shape. I had that knack to, as I mentioned often, to clone things. I'd not only clone the positive shape, but I would clone the negative shape also. So let's just talk about some things in general. Let's take a look at some various images. Some of these I grabbed off the internet, and for the most part, there's a lot of cloning that comes from man-made objects. Obviously, we can see all these Japanese or Chinese lanterns, and then we see in the background also windows that are cloned, and the spaces between them, either vertically or horizontally. There's cloning here. There's cloning here, here. There's cloning here, 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 and here. There's also cloning over here. So the cloning does exist. You look at this whole thing that's cloned here. This becomes a pattern. Cloning can sometimes become a pattern, and it can be a good thing, or it can be a natural thing when it happens to what we know as being more man-made objects. Man seems to easily clone itself. You have an orchard, and you have trees that are so many feet apart, and each row is so wide from the next row is the same width. And the only thing that makes it slightly different is the individuality of each one of those trees. That they may have some real subtle differences to them, but sometimes that is the difference that needs to be observed and drawn properly, because that is the difference between each tree, even though each tree is a similar size and maybe the trunk is almost the same width, but it may branch off slightly different than another one. And the outside perimeter of one tree is maybe slightly different than the other. They will groom and trim the trees so that they best harvest the apples properly to get the sunlight into the middle of the tree. And they'll sometimes trim out the upper part of the tree so that the light can get in and properly ripen the fruit. Now, it's not just on apple trees, but it's a lot of different fruit trees and bushes and so forth. So again, cloning does exist. Here's nature. Here's an example of nature probably cloning at its best. Some of these thistle heads. But look at these other ones where they're very different. Maybe just slightly different angles. Some are, because they're clustered, some are set up one in front of another. There's a little bit of a cloning of this grouping going back like this. So nature can somewhat clone, but yet it's not so much like we saw of those Oriental lanterns. Here's, for instance, a cloning of two heads of thistle, where here this isn't. There's much more interest to that. And there's a little bit more interest to this because there's a little bit different space here than there is between here and here. And so sometimes you can have just subtle differences that will take that heavy weight of cloning away, and it won't be so present. I can't remove all the red lines here. This is another cloning. What one can do sometimes is to, let's say if I wanted to paint this, and I saw this in nature, what I would probably do is not necessarily paint these two thistles as they are here. What I would maybe do is move this one up a little bit so it's a little higher and different, maybe have a little bit more fuller top to it than this one. So once I know that that cloning isn't really good in nature, I'll try to unclone, and a lot of it if you think of it, a lot of the cloning that we see in our reference, it might be because of our unique vantage point that sometimes just needs to be shifted a little bit to the right, or left, I mean a little bit to the right, maybe a little from above, a little bit lower. Sometimes by getting a slight different vantage point, you will lose that sense of cloning that we understand as being a too close of a repetition when it really shouldn't be existing. So vantage point is very important. I'll shift my vantage point, or if I don't want to shift my vantage point because my vantage point really is good for all the other things, then I will do just as I had mentioned. I'll make this thistle a little bit higher, maybe a little bit bigger plume on top, and so that I don't have them right next to one another. Or I might take a space out, put a green space. Let's say I'll put a green space in here. See if I can find some. I'll put a green space in here and just do something like that. And that might be enough to eliminate that cloning that existed prior to that. Let's take a look at some other things here. Here's a beautiful cottonwood tree, just awesome tree. Probably, I'm going to say probably, and I don't recall exactly, but again, because I had issues with cloning quite a bit of my career, and I still have to check myself often that I'm not cloning. But if you take a look at this, it's a little out of focus, but that's not a big problem. Look at the beautiful. Not only look at the. This is the positive element of the shape. This would be the negative, the space around. Not only look at the positive, and if I was to draw a line around here, I'll just draw a line around the whole tree. Okay, and I'll just go up and come around this side here. And I'm just doing a simple, just a simple line drawing around this tree. Not doing every little nuance, I'm just doing a generalization. Then we have openings within the tree. Various negative shapes, going through the tree. Here's one opening up between the two trunks. If I was to get rid of all the other shapes, you would have a very interesting line work. And also, not only of this, again, the positive area, but also of the negative area, the very interesting area of the negative area. This is what a lot of times a student doesn't look at. And when they're drawing a tree, we all want to draw the tree where we do this. And I'm gonna get rid of some of this. I'm gonna get rid of all the red lines. But here's what sometimes how we'll end up painting this beautiful tree is we'll do this. In drawing that tree still is kind of interesting, especially because the trunk is more asymmetrical. But what did I do to the outside? I made the outside much more almost equal. Has a lobe out this way. Let me get a red marker. And it has a lobe out this way, has a lobe out this way. They're a little bit different. This shape here is different than this one. It has this shape coming here, it has this shape coming here, and here and here. It's slightly different, but it's nothing like what the original tree had. And I'll see if I can back up, and I can't back, well, I can pretty much back up everything. Look at how much more beautiful that is with the shapes going way off center. That is asymmetry versus just symmetry. Symmetry is too equal or becoming equal. One of my suggestions would be is to draw, if you have your reference, draw your shapes out on a sketch pad. Draw the scene out, and then when you're done, take some tracing paper and actually trace over top of your reference image and see how well your sketch to begin with replicates the scene, the tree, the asymmetrical elements, and see if you have made things too much in symmetry. Here's another, wonderful tree. Has a main support system that goes off this way, and then it's balanced by this one coming off this way here. If you think of the main framework, that red line is indicating the main framework of this tree. And it becomes very interesting. If you squint down and just look at the red, that becomes much more interesting. Add a few of these other shapes, and what it does is it helps to, even though it's asymmetrical, it helps, these things help to balance one another, even though they're not equal. You're not necessarily looking at equality. Some trees, like pine trees, look very equal, but sometimes the pine trees can be very different when you start to look at the negative spaces around them again. Here again, going back to like the very first slide of the Oriental Chinese lanterns. Here is man-made, and some what I refer to as, we got geometric shapes, all geometric shapes, against organic shapes. And some organic shapes have been, in this case over here, some organic shapes that man puts are manicured. And they're manicured in such a way that they start to resemble some of the other elements that are found in symmetry, in the building itself. Equal windows, panes, and rectangles, and spacing between the little rungs up here. Same with down here in the rungs. The posts are same width. There's so many feet apart. And then we have, to contrast all that, we've got this wonderful apple tree, or I don't know if it's a pear tree, that is the asymmetrical element to all the symmetry. And then we go back to symmetry by a bush that has some symmetry to it, but yet within it there's some asymmetrical elements. And you have this nice little tree out to the side here that's coming in, and again has symmetry compared to the geometric symmetry of the architecture. This is a scene that has, again, a variety of organic and man-made elements. And the man-made elements, you can start looking around and you can start to see the symmetry in the man-made elements. But even there, there's subtle differences between some of the elements that are of man-made. It's the slight little tilt of this one tilting this way, this one tilting back that way. It's a little bit larger because of our perspective. This one is tilting this way. This one's almost straight. This one's behind something. This one's behind something too. This one's tilting a little bit different too. So sometimes the elements that are symmetrical don't always have the same ellipse to them. One might be more open. One might be on an angle. One might be more hardly on any. The ellipse is hardly seen. That sometimes can be, one might be straight that we're seeing it as a circle. That might be the differences that you need to look for or create to lessen sometimes the ugliness that sometimes asymmetrical elements can have. And it doesn't take much. It can take only a little bit like these. There's enough there that is interesting, creates an interest with a little bit of different angle to each one of those. The other thing that makes it different, makes it much more unique, is look at the space between this one and this one. It's this space between this and this one's a little bit more. This is more yet. There's no space between here, and there's some space here that might be similar to some of the other ones, but this is connected together. So you have some that are connected completely. These are connected. These are by themselves, but it's got something in front. So you start to look at the negative spaces between the positive spaces, and there's quite a difference. And if I move maybe more to the right or more to the left, I might get more of that happening. Sometimes I'll find a spot and I go, God, I just have to move just a little bit to the left, and I got much more interesting negative spaces between some of the elements that are cloning one another. And let's say if all the umbrellas that day all were just all like this one here, and they all have that same kind of, like this one's similar. This one is similar. There's three of them that are similar, but they're broke up. But let's say if this one was the same way here, this one was the same way here, this one was the same way. That's actually the same. That one's the same. That one's the same here. It would be pretty boring. Just a little bit of difference of one angling this way, maybe one more open, less open. You see more across the side of it. All those subtle variances are sometimes the things that the beginning artist or the intermediate artist may miss, and they may make those umbrellas all too much alike, and then not think of the spaces between them that are all different. Some darker, some not as dark, and some connected, some not connected. And a lot of times it's a what's referred to as a misdrawing. You didn't draw it correctly. Now there is an element to this scene that has an ugliness to it, or that takes the uniqueness of design away, and it's the space between here and here, here and here, and here and here. Too much alike, and it creates an unpleasant design, even though the rest of it is pretty unique. And then just the big, medium, and kind of small, it's starting to go down in size, doesn't create an interesting, it doesn't create an interesting segue to your background. This background element, before we get to that, we have to go through these. And it's almost like too mechanically done. Sometimes man will plant things that way. So to correct that would be to take this and move that particular shape maybe over. I'm just going to try something and move this shape. So if I was to edit, I would maybe do something like that versus the one where it was equal. And this works out as a grouping. I could also add an additional one, let's say, back in here. What I want to do is I want to add one. And the tendency, without thinking about it, the tendency would be to put it here. And what am I doing? I'd be putting it equally between this pillar here, or this lamppost probably, and this grouping over here. So I might come over here a little bit and add one. I'm going to come with a little bit of a lower one. And I'll make it a little bit maybe offset and have it a little bit more coming off on one side than the other. Come in and find a little bit interesting shape. Whoops. Shape between, find some interesting negative shapes. But now I've got something much more interesting versus what I had earlier. Let's see if I can eliminate that. I couldn't eliminate that before. Let's see if I can erase. I'm not sure how much I can erase and get it back, but I'll see if I can erase and get that gone, make that disappear, bring that one back, and I can't get rid of that one, but you can see how if I would have, how much more interesting you can create a, we can create our scenes if we start to think of the positive and negative shapes and symmetrical. Now here's what I did, is I took that same scene here, and if what I mentioned earlier, take a piece of tracing paper. If you put a piece of tracing paper over your reference and do a line drawing of it, but first do a drawing of this, do a sketch of this. Just on your own, looking at it, and do it in your sketchbook or whatever, do a sketch of it, and then after you're done with that, then take a piece of tracing paper and put your image underneath your tracing paper and do a line drawing of everything. And then compare it to your sketchbook that you did a sketch of, and see if you picked up on the nuances that are actually in the scene. And then, of course, if you find something like we talked about here, where they're two equal, that's something that you need to change. It could be because of man, or it could be because of our unique vantage point that we may have to change. But sometimes I don't want to change the vantage point to better this, because if I change the vantage point, this may not work out. So I'm going to keep the vantage point, but what I'll do instead is do what I talked about earlier. I'll move this tree over to here. And I'll maybe put another one over here as a kind of a balance, and having something and a little bit of bigger space in between, letting this come up into that open space area. So we can I do encourage editing, but you need to edit for a reason, and not edit to create more issues to your pictorial. Having trees that would go here, another one here, and another one here is the father, mother, and the baby tree. That would not be a good design. Yes, it creates movement going down or creates movement going up, but it would be better to have, let's say, this one slightly lower, this one may be closer to that and running off completely up here, maybe partly connected to that one. And then one over here yet much smaller. Whoops, I went right in the middle. Maybe one over here, could be over here further, and then much smaller, and maybe that one's even running off the edge of your paper. So now you created a different puzzle shape here, a different one here, a different one here, and a different interesting shape over here. What should be revealed in your sketch is the cloning of negative shapes, or the cloning or the diminishing in a sense of big, slightly smaller yet shapes that are close to one another, and giving you an appearance of repetition when you really we're not looking for that. This is repetition. And we don't want to change that. I don't want to make one umbrella. The nice thing about this is rhythm, and what makes this interesting, as I mentioned earlier, is the slight different positioning of those umbrellas. One slightly pitched, one slightly close to another one. Some of them connected, some of them overlapping, some of them behind other elements in the scene. That's what makes that whole umbrella thing interesting, and that's not necessarily considered cloning. But if you made them all the same, as I mentioned earlier, instead of looking at the subtle nuances, then you'd have a problem.
Hi, my name is Kenn Backhaus, and welcome to this online art instructional course. I've been involved in the arts professionally my entire life. I'm a signature member of the Plein Air Painters of America, master signature member of both the Oil Painters of America and the American Impressionist Society. My works have appeared in many of the national art magazines. I've been included in several books, to name a few: The Art of the National Parks, Sea to Shining Sea, and The Enchanted Isle, Plein Air Painting on Catalina Island. I was one of the hosts for 2 art-related public television series: Plein Air Painting the American Landscape, and the art instructional series Passport and Palette. I've been teaching art workshops for over 20 years. Prompted by many students' requests, I created this particular Study to Studio course. This course is developed for either the indoor or outdoor painter. The translation from a reference study to a larger studio painting has always been a challenging process. In this 4-week course, I define the tools of my trade, my palette, and an important color mixing demonstration. I will take you through the same exact process which has proven to be successful for me in the studio, including various creative options that will improve the results of your studio efforts. My process of teaching is wrapped around the sound and historic foundations and principles that are the guidelines that defines quality art. I feel confident and believe that you will discover this course to be very beneficial to your future artistic development. Tucson Art Academy's online courses is the new way for art educational opportunities. I hope to see and work with you in this new online course.